This is the original story of Axe Murder Hollow. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded, empty section of highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the sky went dark in the torrential downpour. "We'd better stop," said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake, and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows. "I'm going to see how bad it is," he told Susan, and went out into the storm. She saw his blurry figure in the headlight, walking around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet. "The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel-deep in mud," he said. "I'm going to have to go for help." Susan swallowed nervously. There'd be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Axe Murder Hollow. Although Ned hadn't said the name aloud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the doors. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Supposedly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of the road. Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down into her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then she noticed another sound. Bump, bump, bump. It was a soft sound, like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car. Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by his feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his corpse back and forth so that it thumped against the tree. Bump, bump, bump. Susan screamed and ran toward the voice and the light. As she drew close, she realized the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was the glowing figure of a man, and a smile on his face, and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in his hands. She backed away from the glowing figure and she bumped into the car. "Playing around when my back was turned," the ghost whispered, stroking the sharp blade of his axe with his fingers. "You've been very naughty." The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in the eerie, incandescent light.
Two weeks ago, I had thrown away all of my diaries. Years worth of writing. The bins had been collected. The diaries wouldn't be found. I had sold what furniture and electronics people would buy. Left the money in an envelope. Everything else was boxed up. I had made the house spotless. I took my car along the coast. I wanted to drive that way one last time. I rolled down the window. The salty wind in my face felt wonderful, and I laughed in spite of myself. The laughter kept bubbling out, and I realized how light I felt, how free, for the first time in such a very long time. I stopped about halfway along the white bridge over the cove. Sitting on the rail, my laughter dried up, and the tears came. A car door slammed. A stranger came to the rail. He told me, "I was once where you are now." "What stopped you?" I wanted to know. I made a friend. He sat with me for about an hour silently while I cried, on and off. Finally he said, "Come on, let's go for some coffee." And we started towards his car. I hopped down and looked at him for a moment before sliding into the passenger seat. He shut the door after me, and I realized that the interior door handle had been forcibly removed. There was a handcuff dangling from a piece of the metal frame. He grinned at me from his seat, and he reached to close the cuff over my wrist. As I thought of the suicide note I had left with my neatly boxed belongings, white blinding panic threatened to swallow me whole.
Hello, you. Yes, you. Are you tired of boring plain dreams? Do you want something to get your adrenaline rushing? Something exciting? Tell, my good sir, madame, when was the last time you had a good old bad dream? Now, I know what you're thinking. Bad dreams have quite a bad reputation, but it's all nonsense. Sure, they'll wake you up, but you were gonna do that anyway. You read creepypastas, so you like scary stories, don't you? If you like scary stories, why wouldn't you want a good old bad dream? Oh, how rude of me. I did not even introduce myself. My name is Mr. Nightmare. You see, You'd be surprised how many people actually want nightmares. R.L. Stevenson used a nightmare to come up with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and let me tell you, when his wife woke him up from that nightmare, he got mad. Oh, she meant well, but she, like many people, just don't understand the power of nightmares. And you know what? I do it for free. Let me explain the process. I go into your head while you sleep, which can be tricky sometimes, what with dream catchers and stuff getting in the way. And then I just eat those boring dreams of yours. Yes, sir, I just eat them up. That's why I do it for free, because I get a meal out of it each time I visit. I then search through your head to come up with the perfect nightmare. I find your insecurities, anything scary you might have read or watched or experienced recently, and then I pick which parts to use in your nightmares. I might even have to add something in just to make sure it will scare you. Children are generally easier. They're new to the world and are small, so everything looks big and scary to them. They also have a harder time telling fiction from reality, which makes the process easy. Their little imaginations can come up with the damnedest things sometimes. Of course, searching your minds makes me come to know you on a very personal level. You see, in order to find what I need, I have to look through everything in your head. Why, I might even know you better than you know yourself. Those good dream makers can't say that about you, because they only make things that will make you happy. So they just look at what kind of things you like, which are on the front of your mind. You see, they push the bad things to the back of your head to make my job harder. Quite rude of them. Their actions led to many conflicts. Actually, some of them work for me now, working as nightmares. You met one of them at the door. She used to be a pretty princess who doubled as a love interest for a teenage boy. But now she's my darling, demon-like entity. Can't be replaced. Hard to believe she ever used to be in good dreams. Pardon me, Oh, what? Oh, you're worried about dying in your dreams. Despite popular belief, you don't die in real life if you die in your dreams. Many people die in their dreams and wake up. Well, they cry sometimes, depending on how they died in the dream. You know, sometimes they just dream they died and went to the afterlife, and sometimes they dream about all the little details about how they died. Oh, but you can specify the limits for dying dreams if you like. There's a separate form for that, a waste of paper if you ask me. About the warranty, if you're not satisfied with the nightmare, I'll give you a scarier one on the next day. You can also sign up to receive nightmares while sleeping in certain positions, such as on your back or left side. Look it up. Many people are more likely to have nightmares in these positions. Now, that you're interested, a right smart person you are, I'll tell you. Let me explain how to get it. You have some paperwork to fill out. If you like, though, you can ask for a free trial. Now you enter when you want the dream and what level nightmare you want. See the numbers that go from 1, mildly bad dream, to 10, horrifying life-scarring nightmare. If you want to sign up to get nightmares in certain positions, check which position you want and the nightmare levels you prefer. Oh, the side effects. Those only apply for if you've had or later receive a recent trauma. Besides, you won't remember any of this when you wake up. Well, you might, but it's rare. If you happen to remember, could you advertise for me a bit? Business has been rough and I need to eat, as do my employees. Oh, don't mind the screaming behind the locked door. It's just a dream.
Scarlet hated being grounded, but with her overprotective mother, it was a common thing. Her mother, being an old-fashioned lady, never let Scarlet stay out past 9 o'clock, and last week, she had gotten in major trouble when she arrived home at 11 p.m. It was a Saturday night, and everyone was going to a huge party downtown. Alyssa, Scarlet's best friend, called her and insisted she join her that night.
Everyone's gonna be there,
Alyssa whimpered when Scarlet said she was grounded.
I have my mom's car for the night, and I can get you home by midnight. Just tell your mom you're going to bed early tonight, and sneak out of your window. It'll be easy.
Scarlet thought this through, and she concluded that she simply could not miss out on the party of the year. Alyssa was one hell of a persuader.
Alright,
said Scarlet.
Pick me up in an hour.
This was the first time she ever snuck out. She couldn't help but feel bad about lying to her mom. But she figured, she would get over it. She looked in the mirror. Her long, dark hair fell to her waist.
I can do this,
she thought to herself. Though she be reluctant at first, the risk of what she was doing now filled her with excitement. An hour later, Alyssa arrived according to the plan. Scarlet carefully opened her window and slid outside, tiptoeing to her friend's car. When they arrived downtown, it felt like they weren't even in the right place. The street where the party was supposed to be was disturbingly quiet, and the streetlights were either dimmed or shut off completely. As they slowed down, they found a huge place next to an abandoned warehouse. This had to be the party. All the other buildings were dark and empty. But this one was brightly lit, and the music was booming through the walls. They parked nearby and got out of the car. As they walked up to the entrance, they were surprised to find that there were no doormen or guards standing in front of the entrance. All it had was a raggedy old banner that said, "Welcome," in big, bold letters. When they were inside, they saw hundreds of people dancing and drinking. The music was extremely loud and pounded through Scarlet's head. Alyssa and Scarlet searched for the classmates that had told them they would be there, but they could not find one familiar face. Alyssa, however, did not care, and told Scarlet this was one of the coolest parties she had ever been to. Scarlet wasn't sure if she was scared or not. Some people's faces looked warm and kind, like the blonde girl who waved at them when they first came in. Others looked dark and lifeless, as if they weren't even really there. Before she knew it, she had lost sight of Alyssa. She couldn't find her anywhere. One second she was there, the next she wasn't. Starting to panic, Scarlet made her way through the mob of laughing and dancing people. She located the bar and sat in one of the stools. There was no bartender, which was odd, as the people around her had plenty to drink. Where had they gotten it all? She felt uncomfortable and angry at Alyssa for ditching her. Now, all she could do was sit and wait for Alyssa to hopefully come back to her. It was clear that this party was not the party everyone was going to. She figured Alyssa had just made that up to trick her into going. Alyssa had always had unusual friends and often hung out in strange places. So her pulling something like this didn't surprise Scarlet at all. She cursed Alyssa under her breath and just stared off into the dance floor. Her mind must have been playing tricks on her, like Bushwick Bill. She could have sworn that people's faces would change while they were dancing. It only happened for a fraction of a second. But it seemed that their faces would morph into a disturbing, demonic face with big black eyes and a deformed mouth. However, when she would blink, their faces would be back to normal. She didn't understand it. She wasn't drinking. nor doing drugs.
Why would I see these things?
She thought, confused. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the chills were already starting to run down her spine, and she knew that it was no use. Getting more desperate, she got off the stool and started looking for Alyssa.
Alyssa!
She screamed.
I need to get the hell out of here. I'm gonna kill you for bringing me here.
She kept yelling, but Alyssa was nowhere to be found. Then all of a sudden, someone shoved her hard and she toppled to the floor. She didn't know who did it or if it was an accident, but she was pissed. She wished she was back home in bed. The lights suddenly dimmed and slow music started to play. A love song she had never heard before. Everyone stopped dancing for a moment, getting into pairs before resuming once more. She heard a deep but soothing voice call out, "Are you okay?" She looked up to see a tall, handsome-looking man. He was young, maybe 20 years old, and had blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. By the look on his face, he was very concerned.
I'm fine. I just fell.
She stammered. She always did get nervous with handsome men. He smiled and offered his hand to her, helping her up. "Do you want to dance?" he asked politely. How could Scarlet refuse? He was charming, he was sweet. She accepted, and they walked to the center of the dance floor and started to dance.
You're a good dancer.
She let out, flustered. He just smiled. After dancing for some time, she asked him if he came here a lot. "You could say that," he whispered. Scarlet didn't quite understand his response, but she kept on dancing. "You have a pure soul," he said suddenly in an eerie, quiet voice.
Thank you?
She thought this sounded a little creepy, but it seemed so nice otherwise, and she didn't want to judge.
I'm not so innocent.
She joked.
I snuck out of my house today, and if my mother finds out, I'm dead.
"Oh no," he mumbled, emotionless. He looked down, locking eyes with her. Instead of deep blue, they were now almost black. Scarlet figured it was just the lighting, but the expression on his face had changed as well, from friendly and welcoming to cold and sinister. Suddenly, Scarlet didn't want to be in his presence anymore.
Sorry, I better go find my friend now. It was nice dancing with you, but I really have to go.
She tried to step away, but he quickly grabbed her arms, gripping them tightly. "I know, Scarlet. I know everything about you." As soon as he said those words, the music stopped playing, and the lights shut off. It was pitch black, and she couldn't see a thing. He was still holding her, and she struggled to get away. The lights came back on again, but only for about a second. They flickered on and off, and she could see that the once handsome blonde man was not a man at all. His feet were like that of a goat, and his fingers were not fingers, but huge claws. Long, red claws with pointy nails. He had huge horns, and his face was horrible, resembling some sort of goat with red fur and huge black eyes. The lights kept flickering as his evil grin started to part, and he started laughing hysterically. The most evil, terrifying laughter in the world. "I am Lucifer, the thing boomed. Scarlet was so shocked and scared that she couldn't even move anymore. She felt liquid running down her neck. When she looked down, she was horrified to find blood. Blood everywhere. On her legs, her beautiful silken dress, and on her hands. Scarlet screamed! The lights shut off once more. This time, for almost 10 seconds. When they finally turned on, she was alone. And the place was empty, as if no one had ever stepped foot in it for years. When she turned around, she was horrified to see her friend, Alyssa, hanging lifelessly from the ceiling fan, with blood running down her face. She forced herself to look away, disgusted, and a few gags away from throwing up. That's when Scarlet noticed a horrible, burning feeling on her torso. She lifted up her dress to see what was hurting, and there on her stomach was carved, "You're next."
She was walking around, going insane. She was thinking of her friends, thinking about her family. The voices telling her they are better off without her. She fought with them, trying to see that the voices were wrong. The voices kept going on saying, they're gonna kill you, and kill them first. She went to her dad's room, took the gun, pointing it to his head, pulling the trigger, turning on her mum. Her brother waking up, not knowing what happened. But she was free for now.
I'm a wildland firefighter with the Forest Service. Not my story, but from an old supervisor of mine that I believe completely. The setting is 2004 or so, Hell's Canyon area of Middle Idaho. His crew had been working all day on an emerging incident and were going to be working through the night as well. Being the assistant superintendent of the crew, second in charge effectively, he was out ahead, scouting on an ATV. He was working his way down a logging road that had not been used in some time, when a bobcat or a lynx, it's been a few years since I heard the story, appears in the middle of the road, but doesn't run away as they usually would. The thing stands there for a good 10 seconds, screams at him, and scampers up a tree not 5 feet off the road. He finds this odd, but not particularly unsettling. Just a half mile or so down the road, he finds a small cabin. Also odd, as this is federal land and no private structure should be there. Upon investigation, all the windows had been boarded shut tight, and someone had done a good job of doing so. The door had been punched out and secured to a hole drilled into the log frame by a chain. Someone did not want anything getting in or out. Peering through the hole in the door, he can see that everything in the house is upset. This has him kind of unsettled, so he hops on his ATV and heads back up the road. Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Right where the bobcat had been, now stands a Native American woman in a badly tattered nightgown and bare feet. Just standing there. He yells at her, asking if she needs help. She just screamed at him, the same scream as the cat before, and climbs right up the tree, faster than any human has a right to be climbing. Obviously, he nopes out of there as fast as he can. Now, I would not believe most people that try to tell me something like this, but this was a serious man that did not fuck around about many things. He was dead serious the 2 times I've heard him tell this story, and I 100% believe that he saw what he saw.
I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I think I made you up inside my head. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I lift my lids and all is born again. I think I made you up inside my head. The stars go waltzing out in the blue and red, and arbitrary blackness gallops in. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I dreamed that you bewitched me into bed and sung me moonstruck, kissed me quite insane. I think I made you up inside my God topples from the sky, hell's fires fade, exit Seraphim and Satan's men. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I fancied you'd return the way you said, but I grow old and forget your name. I think I made you up inside my head. I should have loved a thunderbird instead. At least when spring comes, they roar back again. I shut my eyes and all the world drops dead. I think I made you up inside my head.
I suppose I should start by telling you a little about myself. I am 19 years old. I live in Pennsylvania, and I guess I have always been a creative person. When I was little, my parents would remark about what a vivid imagination I had. For the most part, I was a normal child. I liked to draw and writing, and I hated math. I had trouble making friends, so I played with my imaginary friends. We would play games out in the woods. I liked playing with these friends because I knew I could trust them, control them. I knew they would never hurt me. Not like the other beings that I thought up in my head. Or at least I think they were just in my head. I used to have a lot of trouble sleeping at night. I would always get out of bed and get snacks, or watch TV, or play with one of the cats my family would rescue. You see, my mom was a veterinarian, so she would take in stray cats, nurse them back to health, and then adopt them out. It drove my parents nuts for me to stay up so late. Everything was fine until one day, when I was about 9 or so. I was up late, as per usual, when I was playing downstairs. I was playing with a recent rescue animal, who we called Jacob. What? Were you expecting Fluffy? For whatever reason, I was drawn to the large glass doors leading to the backyard. I normally would never go outside at night, and the curtains covering them were always shut. This night, however, I felt the urge to go outside. I opened the curtains, almost expecting to see someone or something to be there, staring in. But nothing was there. I started to feel a bit braver, so I opened the door and stepped outside, Jacob in tow. This is when things got bad. See, Behind my house is a large field, and past that, a forest. None of that was visible. We live in the middle of nowhere, so there were no streetlights, nothing. Only empty space. And for some reason, this empty space was calling to me somehow. I walked into the abyss. I felt a breeze against my face, which smelled like honeysuckle and sage. Mom's garden. I kept walking until, out of the darkness, I saw something walking towards me. It was glowing a pale white. My first thought was a ghost of some sort, but this was different, more physical. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but where the eyes were, there was only black orbs on this pure white form. Almost like it was absorbing the darkness. I wasn't even sure if it was getting closer or bigger. I finally broke out of my trance and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. I took a breath and was drawn to look back outside. It was there, right there, staring in. I shut the curtains and ran back, screaming, to my room. My parents woke up and found me in my room. They yelled at me about being up so late and about how my dad has to be up early tomorrow. I, however, was just glad to be alive and safe. Jacob was gone forever, consumed by the thing. When I told my mom the next morning, she said I was probably tired and imagined it. That Jacob ran away when he was let out and that we'd see him again. We didn't. She tried to tell me that he must have found a home. I knew she was lying. For a while, that was that. But ever since, I have always made sure that all the curtains are closed after sunset, and to never, ever go out after dark. I went away to college a year ago, coming back home for vacations. A few nights ago, while at home for Christmas break, I decided to go outside late one night for a smoke, momentarily forgetting my childhood experience. The air was freezing cold, but the cigarette momentarily warmed me. It formed the only light in this darkness, and soon it appeared again. I ran back inside just like before. Since then, I keep having nightmares that I will look out a window to see it. Its black, shadowy eyes. Its all-consuming body. I'm starting to lose the ability to tell my dreams from reality. I just want to know if I really saw that thing. If it's haunting me. Or if it marked me in some way. My friends think I'm crazy, but do you think I'm crazy?
When you are admitted to a hospital, They place a white band on your wrist with your name on it. But there are other colored wristbands which symbolizes other things. The red wristbands are placed on dead people. There was one surgeon who worked on night shift in a school hospital. He had just finished an operation and was on his way down to the basement. He entered the elevator and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. When the elevator door opened, another woman was about to enter when the doctor slammed the close button and punched the button to the highest floor. Surprised, the woman reprimanded the doctor for being rude and asked why he did not let the other woman in. The doctor said, "That was the woman I just operated on. She died while I was doing the operation. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman smiled and raised her arm. Something like this?
Siren by Devil Jack. So, this is your first trip out to sea. Many like you are making their way out into the ocean more often these days. Middle-class families renting my boat out all the time now for fishing, scuba diving, and even whale watching. Or, like you two, to see the sunset from out on the great expanse of the sea for a romantic date. It is quite a lovely sight to be sure, but she can be cruel as well. While we're heading out to the spot, would you like to hear a scary ocean tale? I promise, young sir, that it will drive that lass of yours further into your arms. What I'm about to tell you happened about 6 years ago, around this very area, to me and an old friend of mine named Sam. Samantha and I had been friends since we were 4 years old. Both of our fathers were fishermen and we were raised on the docks and at sea. One of my earliest memories of Sam was of her teaching me how to tie a sailor's knot, and me teaching her how to bait a hook with a chicken liver. Sam's mother had left her when she was only a year old, and we were 17. Sam's father passed away from throat cancer. Soon after that, Sam joined the Navy like her father had at that age, and she was off to war a year later. I didn't see Sam for 8 years, and when she did come back, she wasn't the same. The doctors called it PTSD, but it's just what happens to you when you see more shit than your head can handle. One thing hadn't changed though. She was still my friend. So what if she had nightmares or the occasional hallucination? I always felt it made her less boring than most folks. She moved back into her father's old place and was nice enough to let me move in with her when my home got foreclosed on during the housing crisis. She pretty much stayed inside except for when we went fishing, but luckily we went fishing a lot. Then, 6 years ago, Sam and I were out fishing when a bad storm hit. The sea claimed our boat, but we managed to get to the life raft and survive the rest of the storm. How about we take a break and have a drink? I have a great bottle of spirits for just such an occasion. Besides, what romantic date would be complete without a toast? To young love, may it weather the storms before it, and to old friends. Thank you for sharing a drink with an old sea dog such as myself. What was that? Oh, what happened to Sam, you ask? Well, yes, I suppose I should finish the tale. Where was I? Oh yeah. When the storm had calmed herself, her bluster all spent, we found ourselves stranded in a lifeboat out at sea. We figured we'd be found relatively quick, so we didn't panic. That is, until the end of the second day. As the sun set on the second day, we were hungry, thirsty, sunburnt, and starting to panic. It was late that night that Sam first heard the song. She told me that she heard a tune being sung out on the water. I listened for a good long while, but finally had to confess that I heard no sound. At first, she assumed that it was her mind playing tricks on her, but the next night she accused me of being either a liar or hard of hearing. She only heard the song at night, but I still heard nothing. The fourth day, we were both losing our strength and our minds. We had a single canteen of water when we got onto the lifeboat. We had rationed it carefully, but it was now gone. Our thirst was great. On one hand, we would long for the coolness of the night air, but on the other, we had both begun to fear the loss of our sanity. That's why they call it lunacy, I think, because the light of Luna, the moon, makes it stronger. According to Sam, the song was getting louder. She swore that we were getting closer to its source. She now believed I was willfully ignoring the sound to mock her. I swore to her I didn't, but she had begun to ignore me. I tried to stay awake with her. I was worried about her, but my body gave out from lack of nourishment. The sweet relief of slumber took me. I awoke with the sun to find her gone. I sat alone in the lifeboat. Never before in my life had I felt so absolutely helpless. I yelled for her again and again till I lost my voice, but there was no sign of her. She was simply gone. I loved her. I know that, like I know the sun rises in the east, but I had never told her. That was the longest day of my life, sitting, starving alone in that boat. The sun hissed mercilessly at my already blistered skin. My mouth was so very dry, but all that I could feel was the loss of Samantha. Never had I hated the sea till that day. Why would someone who hates the sea still captain a boat, you might ask, if you could still talk? Well, I'll tell you. That night, consumed with sorrow, I looked into the sea. I was going to throw myself into its depths. I couldn't endure another day like the previous. But just before I threw myself into the abyss, I heard it. I heard the song playing through the wind and swirling through the waves. It was the song that Samantha had heard, and I must admit, it was beautiful. I wept with tears I did not have the water to make. I had never cried like that before, nor since. I was found by the rescue team later that night. They had heard me wailing, and it had brought them to me. The doctors said I had been hallucinating from dehydration, but they hadn't heard it. I had. Now that the paralytic that I put in your drinks has kicked in, I'm going to tell you a secret. I've never told another living soul what I'm about to share with you. I still hear the song. It's her song. She sang it to me that night in the lifeboat. Her song told me that she knew I loved her, and that she loved me in return. It told me that she had to leave me and return to the sea. I asked if I could come with her, and it told me that I could join her in time. But first, she needed my help. She sent me back into the world for one reason, to bring her more company. Once I have brought her enough, I can join her. I always bring lovers to remind her of my love for her. I tie them to cement blocks like these here. Then I tie them together so that they can join my beloved Samantha in the arms of the one they love. Finally, I give them to the sea and watch them as they disappear into its depths. I know that you're frightened. To you I must seem mad. I'm sure you think that I'm murdering you even, but I promise I'm not. Soon, you'll hear the song, too.
twisted. The saying, the action, is it twisted? That I put this knife in you? Is it twisted that I find it soothing? I like the feeling. The light leaving your eyes. Me making it happen. I liked feeling the last breath you took. Hearing the final gasp you took. Going on to the next. Keeping it on repeat. This time I recorded it. So this last breath I can play on repeat. For a week, I think. Licking the knife is giving me a rush. Time to do it again.
Years ago, my family went on vacation at Cape Cod, and we rented a small old house to stay in for 2 weeks. On the main floor was the kitchen, the living room, and a bathroom. The bedrooms were on the second floor. There was a basement room downstairs with a washer and dryer, a sofa, and a television. On the first night, we were all awakened by a terrible scream from my sister's bedroom. When my dad burst into her room and turned on the light, he found her sitting up in bed, screaming and crying. My parents sat down with her and comforted her until she finally calmed down enough to tell them what had scared her. She said that she had been awakened in the middle of the night by a horrible stench. When she opened her eyes, she had seen the entire bedroom was soaked in blood from top to bottom. There was blood all over the floor, bloody handprints on the walls, and blood splatters all over the ceiling. We all thought that she had been having a nightmare, but she refused to go back into her bedroom and stayed in our parents' room for the remainder of the holiday. One evening, my mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen upstairs, and my father had gone out on an errand in a nearby town. My sister and I were in the basement room, watching TV, when all of a sudden, the light bulb popped and the TV went off, leaving us in complete darkness. The basement was unfinished and had old stone walls, making it a bit of a creepy place. For a few seconds, we just froze, not knowing what to do. Then we started to smell something horrible. It was a terrible stench, and when it hit our noses, we felt nauseous. It smelled like rotting flesh. The smell quickly grew worse and worse, and we just heard a scratching in the darkness. Something seemed to be scratching at the floor, or the walls. We screamed and began scrambling around in pitch dark, trying to find the door. Eventually, we managed to open the door and ran upstairs, screaming to our mother. We kept telling her about the disgusting smell, and we heard something scratching and scraping from around down there. My mother eventually agreed to go down into the basement, replace the bulb, and check out the source of the horrible smell. She took a flashlight and a new bulb and disappeared into the darkened basement. As we waited for her at the top of the stairs, we expected her to return quickly, but she seemed to be down there for an eternity. Suddenly, we saw her emerge out of the darkness and come running up the stairs. She slammed the basement door behind her and bolted it as fast as she could. She turned to us, and we could see her face had completely drained of color. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she just said, "I don't want you going down there again." Then she went into the kitchen and called the police. We overheard her conversation on the phone and managed to figure out that she had seen someone down in the basement room. As we waited for the police to come, we huddled together in the living room, staring at the basement door. At any moment, we expected to hear someone banging on it or trying to break it down. My mother refused to tell us what she had seen. When the police arrived, my mother greeted them at the front door and ushered them inside. She unbolted the basement door, and they went down into the darkness with their flashlights out and their guns drawn. They searched the entire basement room, but found nothing. There was no other way out of the basement. No windows, no doors. Whatever was down there would have had to come up through the basement door. After the police left, my mother finally revealed what she had seen down there in the pitch-black basement room. As she spoke, she became very still and quiet. She said that she had been changing the light bulb downstairs when she had begun to smell the horrible stench we had described to her. Then she started to hear a faint scratching noise. She shone her flashlight around the room and suddenly caught the sight of something crouched between the washer and the dryer. It was a man, crouched on all fours. His clothes were tattered, his hair was wild and tangled, and his face didn't look human. It was twisted in an expression of pure hatred. In that split second, he looked up at my mother, his eyes reflecting the beam from her flashlight. Then she suddenly crawled forward and disappeared through a wall. When my mother saw him simply vanish into thin air, she dropped the flashlight and ran. After that, none of us would go down into the basement. We kept the door locked and bolted. Every night, we slept in our parents' room and locked that door too. We cut our holiday short a few days later and just drove home.
Re by Zchxz. I'm the luckiest girl in the world. No, I didn't marry the most wonderful guy or win the lottery. I've got something better. I found a magic lamp. Genies don't look nearly the way you expect. They're not beautiful, scantily clad women or happy, bright blue spirits. They're more pinkish, almost red-skinned, with hunched backs and tattoos all over their wrinkled body. Their eyes glow a dim yellow that almost seems to smoke out the sides. Worse still, they only give one wish instead of the regular 3, spitting out quick rules with a hissing, slurred speech. And yes, I tried all the clever wordplay to try and get more wishes. The thing just growled at me with sharp teeth and a twitching nose. That shut me right up. So I went with the next best thing. Superpowers. Not flight or invisibility or anything too obvious. I didn't want to wind up strapped down to a cot in the basement of some non-existent government facility, watching anthropomorphic lab coats poke and prod my every inch. I can hardly go to the doctor for a checkup. No, I chose the ability to save and load my life, just like in a video game. The genie thrust a lengthy nail into my chest, passing through the flesh like a hologram and scratching my ribs before vanishing. I brushed off my chest and looked to find the lamp had disappeared as well. First thing I did was save. I thought really hard to mentally lock the moment in time, though I had no clue if it worked. I checked my watch to test it out, waited a bit, and thought about reloading. The watch didn't move. It paused, and my vision faded out as my sense of self pulled backwards out of my body. I looked at myself frozen in time, my surroundings tinted gray. Above my body's head flashed a series of boxes, all empty except for the one on the far left. A snapshot of my view of my watch lay in the box with a time and date corresponding to my mental save point. I floated towards it and pressed the box like a touchscreen, then found my spirit snapping back into my body. My watch read the previous time. It worked. I've been exceptionally careful since, only saving when I knew I was safe. I've read all sorts of stories where people abuse the power, winding up saving right before getting hit by a car. The good news for me is I can have up to 10 files, so even if I screw up, I can reload another moment and overwrite the bad save later. Hell, I've even died a few times. This latest time, though, something doesn't seem quite right. I'm floating behind my mangled corpse, and all I can hear is a faint, hissing, sort of a laugh slowly creeping closer. And every time I try to press a box, I hear the words, "File corrupted."
After the birth of my son, I decided that whenever I was around him, I needed to do my very best to be a perfect father. What that meant was to try to shield him from the ugly realities of life. I made a promise to him, as well as myself, to only ever expose him to beautiful things, to show him that the world was a wonderful place, full of amazing stuff, not disgusting and grotesque things. I was also very mindful not to fill his head with imaginary things, stuff like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. That might seem strange, but here's my logic. Those things are imaginary, and what it means is that if I told him a lie, when he got older, I would have to break his heart by telling him it was a lie, and I just couldn't bring myself to do that. Instead, I just encouraged him to be imaginative, to create those wonderful and exciting things for himself, and I was very lucky that my family was supportive. They never filled his head with things like the tooth fairy and stuff like that. But as soon as my son started kindergarten, that all changed. I would pick my son up from school and he'd be telling me about the Easter Bunny, or any other such character that coincided with the current upcoming holiday. Even though this frustrated me quite a bit, I figured it wasn't doing him any harm. After all, it wasn't me lying to him, and it's not like the kids were aware that they were lying either. They were just being misinformed by their parents, and since holidays are a fun thing, I actually thought it would be okay. But that all changed. My son made a new friend at school named Donovan. They were exactly the same age, and I guess maybe that's why they got along so well. Something about synchronicity and matching birthdays. I only met Donovan a handful of times when I picked my kid up from school. He seemed like a very nice boy, but something about him seemed kind of odd. He began telling my son about the Boogeyman. Again, I wasn't entirely keen with anyone filling my child's head with lies. But holiday mascots aside, I found this one to be particularly disturbing. Donovan began telling my son stories about the Boogeyman. Stories about how he would hide in your closet or under your bed, and if you were naughty, sometimes he would come out from his hiding spots and stand over your bed and watch you as you slept in the middle of the night. I kept trying to reassure my son that Donovan was just pulling his leg, and that it was just a story, complete make-believe. I tried to convince him for the better part of 4 weeks that there was no such thing as the Boogeyman. But since my son and Donovan got along so well, I couldn't convince my son otherwise. After all, Donovan wasn't technically lying to him. Someone else had filled his head with that nonsense. After a while, my son started having night terrors. Almost every single night, he would come into my room crying, his heart racing inside his tiny chest, complaining that there was something in his closet. He'd be absolutely terrified and 100% convinced that he had done something wrong and that the Boogeyman was waiting for him and going to hurt him. For the next several weeks, I did my best to put up with it. I really just wanted my kid to start sleeping in his own bed again and not be afraid. So I thought perhaps it would be a good idea if Donovan came over to have a sleepover with him. I met up with Donovan's dad at the school and spoke with him about having his son stay over for the night. I can't begin to tell you how relieved I was when I saw my son smile ear to ear at the mention of this. Donovan seemed to smile just as big, if not bigger, and they both seemed super excited about it. It was around 6 p.m. that night when Donovan's father dropped him off. I let him and my son play video games for a couple of hours while I watched TV in the other room. They were having a great time, and this made me super happy because I figured my son would just sort of wear himself out, and both of them would sleep through the night. I went to bed a little earlier than usual and told him not to stay up too late. At some point in the middle of the night, both my son and Donovan came into my room crying. I asked them what was going on and what was the matter, and they both told me the exact same thing. They said that they thought the Boogeyman was hiding in the closet, and that he was going to hurt them. I just wanted to ease their minds and hopefully get them back to bed, so I took them both back to my son's room, turned on all the lights, and showed them the inside of the closet. I even walked in and out of it a few times to show them there was nothing there, and therefore no reason to be afraid. At this point, my son went to get a drink of water from the bathroom, and Donovan said something to me that I found extremely disturbing. He told me that the reason he was so afraid that night was because right before his father dropped him off, he had told him that he needed to behave and not make any trouble. Donovan's father had told him that a string of recent murders inside the city had been done by the Boogeyman, and that if he didn't behave that night, the Boogeyman would be coming for him next. I tried very unsuccessfully to tell Donovan that there was no such thing as the Boogeyman, and how horrible I thought it was that his father would say something like that to him. But then Donovan said something very strange. He told me he had seen the Boogeyman a few nights earlier inside of his closet. He said this had happened on a night when he had accidentally broken a plate at dinner time. His father yelled at him and sent him to bed early. At some point during the night, Donovan woke up to the sound of his closet door opening. He said he saw a dark figure exit the closet and stand over his bed, making a strange raspy sound as it breathed. He said the face of this thing looked really grotesque and disfigured, like a damaged Halloween mask. I stayed up the rest of the night with both the boys, because at this point, they were too terrified to sleep, and I was way too frustrated with Donovan's father. It's not that I didn't believe what Donovan was telling me. I actually did. But I knew there had to be more to this story than what he was telling me. The next night I called Donovan's father and invited him to the house for coffee. I sent my son to bed early so that we could talk without being interrupted. By the time he got to my house, he looked like he had already had a fair amount to drink. We started the conversation off by talking about sports and whatnot, just making small talk. What I really wanted to do was get a good sense of what type of father he was. Something in his mannerisms told me that he was abusive. I never saw any bruises or marks on Donovan's body, but to be honest, I hadn't really been looking for them. But I could definitely tell that there was some sort of emotional abuse happening. The more we talked, the more I started to detest this man. I then told him I wanted to talk to him about something that Donovan had said during the sleepover. I asked him point blank, "Have you been telling your son about the Boogeyman?" He said yes. "Haven't you ever told your son about that whenever he does something bad and you want him to behave?" I told him absolutely not. I would never do anything like that to my child. So how could you? He then told me about all the things Donovan had done, which, to be honest with you, I don't think merited what he was telling him. Not picking up toys, broken dishes, all things that kids are guilty of. Nothing that warrants being traumatized by their father. I then asked him about what Donovan had told me about seeing the boogeyman inside of his closet, and just how convinced he was of it. I asked him if he had let Donovan watch any scary movies or anything like that, to which he replied absolutely not. But he did admit something. He admitted that on that night that Donovan saw the boogeyman hiding in his closet, that it was actually him, dressed up in a Halloween mask and a black coat. He said he was just trying to teach his son a lesson, and that he really wasn't a bad parent for doing it. He tried to justify it by saying a lot of parents did things like that, and their kids turned out just fine. I then explained to him how concerned I was that my son had been hearing these things. I tried to reason with him and explain to him that we need to be raising our kids to see the world as a wonderful place, an exciting place, and we need to let kids be kids, not fill their heads with such horrible garbage. He, of course, got extremely defensive, which was to be expected. If the tables were turned, I probably would have gotten defensive as well. I put my cup of coffee down on the table, and then I said to him, "I need to ask you something else. In all this time you were playing the boogeyman, scaring your child like that, did you also tell your son that the boogeyman was responsible for all those murders that were happening inside the city?" I was a bit surprised when he chuckled at this. I didn't find it funny at all, but he seemed to. He said yes. I pretended to be the boogeyman. And yes, I told my son that the boogeyman was going around town and killing people that were misbehaving. Why is that such a bad thing? I then looked him square in the eye, and I told him the last words he would ever hear before I broke his neck. I don't like when people take credit for my work.
They say if you want a healthy marriage, don't put a TV in your bedroom. I'm sure that's handy advice for a lot of reasons. We decided snuggling up to Netflix was worth the risk, and I figured we could overcome any hardships. Well, I wasn't expecting this. Last night the TV switched on by itself. It wasn't full blast, but it was louder than normal, and some whimsical commercial music was playing over some happy looking folks, using kitchenware really badly. I couldn't tell you what time it was, but we'll come back to that. Now, as a fellow Redditor who's into freaky stuff, I was browsing r/paranormal the other day, and saw a post about a guy's TV switching on at night, and he asked if it was paranormal. I joked about how it was 100% ghosts, no question. My current situation is making me question my belief in karma. So back to the time thing. Other than the TV, the room was dark. We have a neat little stained glass lamp I had made that stays on all the time. I put an LED bulb in there so it doesn't get hot or anything. I feel like I'm rambling. Sorry. Anyway, it was off. My phone was off. And I couldn't see any light from under the bedroom door, so apparently the laundry light was off too. We don't leave it on purpose. It just... rambling again. Sorry. I looked over to check my wife's phone, and she wasn't there. Her phone was there, off as you probably suspected, but the wife was gone. The sheets were pulled back as if she'd gotten up. I figured she must have switched the TV on. Man, I'm stupid when I first wake up. See, we don't have cable in the bedroom, but before long I see a news broadcast kick in. I'm fairly certain it was WABT News, but that doesn't sound like a familiar call sign. They started talking about road closures or something. But I was more interested in my wife. I get up and call her name softly. I didn't want to wake the baby. I mean, she's asleep on the other side of the house, and we have noise machines going, but... rambling. I slipped out of bed, and looked into the bathroom. It was so dark I couldn't even see all the way to the tub. so I flicked on a light. After nearly blinding myself, I was able to determine that she wasn't in there. Honestly though, hanging out in a pitch black room isn't really her thing. A little more worried now, I head out of the bedroom. We have an open floor plan, so a couple steps out of the bedroom and you can see the whole living room. The front and back door, the kitchen, and the dining room. Well, normally you can. I couldn't because it was too fucking dark. All I could make out was a bit of the dining room, and some dim light from the TV glinting off the back door, which is 90% window. It took me a second to figure out why it looked so wrong. You'd expect it to be dark outside. I mean, it was nighttime. But it was like someone painted my windows black. No starlight. No streetlights which usually poke through the tree line. No moonlight. I pulled the blinds up, and all but pressed my face to the glass. I honestly couldn't tell if the window was covered or not, so I decided to flip the back porch light on. It seemed like such a good idea, and it worked. I could now see my back porch. I was happy for a moment. My windows weren't covered in tar or whatever, yay. But then I got this really bad feeling. It settled over me as I strained to make out the tree line. I got the sense that my back porch light may be the only light in the universe. I felt, in my stomach of all places, that I was at the center of something unimaginably dark and void. And I'd flipped on a look at me beacon for whatever was out there, unseen. I turned the light out. That's when the silence hit me. Noise machines. They weren't on. I started to mad dash across the living room towards baby girl's hallway, and stepped on one of her giant toy cars. A couple of things happened then. First, I screamed out a word I don't want baby girl to say until she can vote. Second, my foot flew out from under me, causing me to stumble. Third, as I caught my balance, I heard a voice. Nate? I spun around and there was my wife, and the moonlight. All at once I realized things were different. The laundry room light was on. My big dumb dog was shaking his big dumb head back in the bedroom. There was enough ambient light from outside to actually see in the room I was in. And best of all, the noise machines were back on. Melissa? She gave me a look equal parts confused and annoyed. What are you doing? You're gonna wake up baby girl. Come back to bed. I'm not one to refuse an order. So back to bed we went. I asked her about the TV and she said she never even heard it. She's been in bed the whole time.
God, I hate phone music. Who gets paid to compose this shit? It's not even as if it's a known tune. It's just something some poor sap banged out on the keyboard somewhere in his parents' basement. I can see the requirement presented to them now. Nothing fancy. We want bland, mixed with soul destroying. Just make sure it's a minute long. Drumming my fingers along to the monotonous beat. It's not as if I've got anything else to do as I wait. Here comes the 1 minute mark. And time for the droning, bodiless voice again. Yay. Thank you for holding. Your time is important to us. Someone will be with you shortly. Christ, the last time I heard someone that emotionless, it was my wife. Thank God she's not a problem anymore. I just want to get the insurance claim moving. This music's really beginning to get to me now. Setting my teeth on edge. Why the hell won't someone pick up my call? Their customer service is shit. Fuck it, I'll call back later. No, it'll be just as bad then. Just gotta stay on the line and wait. Someone will answer. Eventually. And then I'll finally be able to start the ball rolling on my new life. Police and fire have done their rounds. Nothing. I'm free and clear. All the paperwork's done. Just this final call to the insurers, and it's all finished. Once the money's in the bank, they won't see me for dust around here. Rid of my responsibilities, rid of this shithill town. And now that I've dealt with that miserable bitch, shame about her sister and her kid though. But how was I to know? Thank you for holding. Your time is important to us. Someone will be with you shortly. For fuck's sake. All I've been hearing for God knows how long is some shitty phone music, that soulless voice, and the drumming of my fingers. Maybe I should call back later. No, I'm here now on the line. I just gotta show some of the same patience I used when planning the fire. I've got the time. I'm in no hurry. I just need to wait a little while longer. That's all. Could always entertain myself with drawing what I'm going to buy with all that money here in the dust. Always had a hankering for one of those expensive convertibles. Dust. Why is there so much dust on this desk? Wait. How long have I been on hold now? I don't know. Minutes? Hours? Days? Years? No, that can't be right. I'd know. Surely I'd know. I can remember what I was doing this morning. I was, Christ, when did I last sleep? When did I last eat? Hell, when did I last move? Hold on, that's a lie. My fingers are still moving, drumming along to that relentless droning music. A quick reassuring look. Huh? Why didn't I notice that sharp tap 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 of my fingers on the desk before? The way my sleeve hangs loosely on the bare dusty bones protruding from it. Snap out of it. Wake up. Wake up, you dumb bastard. It's a dream. It has to be. Focus. Focus on anything. Listen to the music even. Just think. Work out what's going on here. There it goes again. Looping round and round. The same bouncy, repetitive tune. What's that underneath it though? That sound. I hadn't heard it before, but now I can almost make it out. It sounds like the crackle of flames and the sound of muted screams piling over and over and over each other, tearing at my ears. No, I'm going mad. I must be. Wake up. Please, just wake up. Thank you for holding. Your time is important to us. Someone will be with you shortly. Oh God, I can hear something in the voice now. Just at the end, a barely contained laughter. Throw the phone down. Throw it as far as you can. Get up from this desk and run. Just run and never stop running. I can't. The phone remains pressed to my head. The music spills into it in a never-ending flood. And my drumming, skeletal fingers keep an eternal beat, caught in an endless loop. God, I hate phone music.
A month of rain. When I was around 7 years old, I was evacuated from my childhood town. I can somewhat remember the events clearly, even if most of it's pretty hard to recall. But since all of you guys are looking for a good spook, I'll give it a shot and tell the tale. So, in my childhood town, I had a good friend named Finny. Finny and I were really close, almost like brothers. I was an only child growing up, and I hung out with Finny almost every day, if memory serves. My childhood memories were so precious, and the town itself was so peaceful and benevolent. The town was surrounded by woods, and it even had its own police station and town hall. Everything was picture perfect. Everything was fine, until there was a month of rain. When I say a month of rain, I literally mean it. It would never stop raining. It rained that whole month, non-stop. And it was kind of strange since the rain came in unannounced by meteorologists. It was almost similar to that of a hurricane, with strong winds, thunder, lightning, and a lengthy period of rain. It almost came out of nowhere. It just started pouring. The sky went dim and gloomy, the clouds rolled in, the rain fell, and it continued for as long as I could remember. Eventually the ponds, canals, and rivers started rising due to the heavy rain. The flooding all took place within the first 2 weeks. I remember this one night when it was thundering. I was looking outside my window. I noticed that the lightning had strange colors. Some would look orange, others would look green, and some even purple. This made the rain fall even harder. Eventually the water had gotten so high that it reached up to our ankles. We still went to school since they thought the floods weren't too big of a deal. They made us wear raincoats, boots, and also made us take umbrellas with us every day. We all took notice that there was an outbreak of insomnia among us children ever since the rain arrived. I found it hard to sleep as well, and it was one of the many reasons I looked at the lightning at night. We all felt so drawn to the rain and found it strangely soothing and calming. The lights continued in the sky every night until eventually there was the loudest thunder strike. At least I thought it was. I bet it woke up the whole town. It struck somewhere within the woods, and then things got weird. Every night we'd hear weird noises, voices, whispers, and scratching outside. Sinkholes or burrows could be found all over patios, lawns, gardens, and the woods. The water rose up to our waists, and eventually school was called off on occasion. My friend Finny and some other kids in our clique would visit my house often to play. Sometimes they would even stay the night. I remember this one time waking up one night and being drawn to the window. We were in the living room, and my other friend Bryce was looking out the window I felt enticed to look out of when I awoke. He and 2 other kids were at the window looking outside as if intrigued. They said that someone was calling out to them and inviting them out to play in the rain. We looked outside and saw nothing. A few minutes passed as we continued to look out the window, feeling strangely enticed to go outside. Eventually the rain hit harder, and it also appeared that something was swimming in my flooded backyard. It never emerged from the water to show us its identity or what it was. We just assumed it was the rain making weird patterns in the water as it hit it. The urge to go outside remained, and we began hearing whispers again. They usually ranged from, "Come outside, it is safe," or "Come play with us." Mostly what someone would say to convince a child to come out of a hiding spot. My dad came home, and we pretended to sleep since it was way past our bedtimes. My dad was a police officer and was working hard lately, but my friends and I did not know why. I remember my dad walking in and speaking to my mother. He said that kids were disappearing one by one, and they'd had no luck catching the kidnapper, and that the abductions were taking place much more frequently. It was true. Walter, Lee, Jennifer, and many others didn't show up at school or any type of meeting place we would visit. I remember his face being so discouraged and worried, almost sickened. I remember my mom and dad's conversation as my friends and I laid awake, listening to every detail.
"We couldn't find a single trace. Some were even taken from home, and there were no signs of forced entry,"
he said, and my mother sat next to him trying to comfort him. Other conversations went on, but nothing too relevant to what was happening at the time, and they eventually went to bed. However, before they did, they made sure to lock all the doors and close all the curtains. My friends and I stayed up talking about what we'd just heard, and made up our own little ideas on what was happening, but they were all very childish. From time to time, the whispers would return and wake us up. Sometimes it was even scratching or clawing at the walls or windows. We wouldn't dare to open the curtains and see what it was for ourselves. Who could blame us? I mean, there was a madman that kidnapped children on the loose. These events went on for weeks, and the kidnappings only got worse. Houses were found empty in the morning, and sometimes some kids would be left behind, too traumatized to speak, or alone in the house with, again, no signs of forced entry. The town was mortified, and eventually a town meeting was called. Some of my friends were missing too, and all that was left of my clique was Finney and Dalton. We waited outside the courthouse with my mom as it went on. I remember asking what they were talking about, but my mother would always avoid telling me, usually by saying, "Some very boring stuff grown-ups talk about, dear." Or, "You're too young, you wouldn't understand. Plus you'd probably fall asleep. It's pretty long, honey." I remember the night before the evacuation, exactly one day before the month finished. I lived next door to Dalton, and it was the night I saw them leave. The lights didn't even go on. They sort of just went out of the house, leaving everything behind. They didn't bother to lock the door, they didn't bother to pack, and they didn't bother to change clothing. They left their front door and walked into the woods. I assumed they were taking a shortcut, but I still found it pretty strange. It was drizzling a bit as they left, and the rain was beginning to die down. I started hearing whispers again, only much louder. I looked out of my window and looked at the flooded streets. I saw strange patterns in the water again, as if it was trailing a moving object under the water. I remembered that there was a crazy person stealing children at night, and I decided to close my curtains so that no one could see into my room. Then the clawing and scratching began. The whispers and scratching never left, and I was surprised I even fell asleep. I was awoken by my mother and the sound of the emergency evacuation alarm that the town hall had set off. I was too groggy to panic, and I just followed my mom outside. We were going through our escape route that went through higher terrain within the woods, and we took a dirt road. As we plodded through the water, we met with Finney and his mother. They both talked for a while as we paused awaiting others to join us. My father and a couple of his squad came through the road bearing shotguns and flashlights. My mother asked him what he was doing, and my father only replied,
"We found the place they were keeping the children,"
in the grimmest of expressions I've ever seen. My mother kissed him goodbye and wished him and his squad good luck as they trudged through the murky, muddy waters and into the deep woods. My mom motioned for me to come with her, but suddenly another woman came asking for help. My mom told me and Finney to stay put as she left with Finney's mother to assist the woman. We did as we were told and stood in the muddy and murky waters. We began to hear faint whispers again and felt soothingly relaxed. The feeling was ominous, and it persisted for the duration that we spent waiting for our mothers to return. I remember tripping into the water, or so I thought, until I couldn't seem to stand up. I panicked when I felt a force pulling me into the water, and as I heard Finney's panicked screams, I felt a hand grab tightly onto my shoulder and pull me to the surface. My mother carried me and placed me onto a nearby fence and checked on me. I thought I probably tripped into a sinkhole or a deep area of the trail since there were many holes around here. I noticed Finney's mother calling out his name and searching everywhere for him. I didn't realize that Finney had fallen in with me too. I continued thinking it was a sinkhole we slipped into, and that's what I told Finney's mother and my mom. That is, until I felt a throbbing pain and bruise on my ankle. Upon inspecting it, we found that a skinny, bony handprint was left on it. Another loud clash of lightning occurred, and it began to rain again. We eventually reached high ground, and we got into the buses and cars that waited for us. Many of the cars there were loved ones and family that came to pick up the townspeople that evacuated. We found that my uncle was waiting for us, and we got into his car. I didn't see my dad or Finney at the evacuation area. Come to think of it, I never saw my dad or his squad again. They were announced missing, and to this day, I'm still not sure what happened to them or Finney, along with all the other children. I am certain of one thing. There was something in the water.
I was backpacking in Arkansas, the Eagle Rock Loop in the Washita National Forest. There's a section of the trail that goes through an area called the Albert Pike Recreation Area. In June of 2010, a flash flood killed 20 people, including men, women, and children. There's a ton of stories online about this event if you want to look it up. So I start my trip at Little Missouri Falls, going counterclockwise. It's 26 miles with some pretty good climbs. You can find a map of the loop on Google Images. So I hiked a fairly long day. If you Google Eagle Rock Loop map, you will find a basic sketch map, not the topo map, just one of the basic ones with the labels of the trails, mountains, and water crossings on Pinterest. At the bottom of the map there's a single water drop with a yellow circle around it. This just means it's always a wet crossing. There are several yellow circled water drops. The single one at the very bottom right next to the Viles Branch Trail. That is exactly where I was camped, so anyone can go there if you want to look it up and see what I'm talking about. So, that is the Little Missouri River. The water is flowing away from Albert Pike. I'm maybe 4 to 5 miles downstream from where the flash flood occurred. I don't know if this is significant or not to my story, but I'm not ruling it out either. I set up camp at about 4 p.m. for the day. This was November of last year. Fairly cold nights. It was about 26 degrees the night before. I was expecting another cold night in the high 20s. Not a lot of movement around there that night when it was cold. Most animals hunker down. I use a tarp where both ends are open. I have an inflatable sleeping pad and my 35-degree sleeping bag. Now, I'm set up on completely level ground. On my pad, on the tarp inside my sleeping bag, I quickly fall asleep around 10 p.m. after sitting around the fire. Everything is normal all evening, and all night for the most part. Now, you know when you're asleep and you fall in your dream? You get that sensation like you're falling in real life when you tense up and always wake up on impact. Okay. Well, I was asleep and I get the sensation sort of where I feel like I'm being dragged out of my tarp by my feet. Except it wasn't by my feet, I was being pulled by my sleeping bag. Like my whole pad with me in it suddenly being dragged out quickly. I woke suddenly as it startled me. Keep in mind, it was really cold, low 30s to high 20s at this point. And I have a 35-degree sleeping bag. So I'm inside my bag all the way with the top closed off by a shock cord. I'm completely inside my bag, covered to stay warm. Now, I'm wide awake and listening for any movement. Everything is still and quiet, except for the river next to me, obviously. That is the only sound I can hear. I didn't peek out my head. I just laid there awake and listening. I sat there for a good 15 minutes listening for any sound outside of the river. I never heard anything. Granted, the river is pretty loud being right there, but there was no movement around my camp at all. So I chalked it up to having that falling sensation when you dream. I figured I must have been dreaming about something and it made me feel like that I fell or something. I went to sleep for 30 or 45 minutes longer, still keeping my ears open but figuring I was probably just dreaming. So for the most part, I just shrugged it off and put my mind off of it and got back to sleep. Morning comes and I get up and put my shoes on and roll out of bed. I head straight over to the fire to pit it and stoke at the fire for first thing because it's definitely cold outside at 6:30 a.m. this morning. I turn back towards my tarp and head over to get my food hanging close by. That's when I noticed it, and I froze. My pad and sleeping bag at the foot end are sticking out from under my tarp, by a good 1.5 feet at least. I can think about how now, as I felt being dragged out from under my tarp the night before, staring at how my bed is from under the tarp. I slowly approach the tarp and look for any sort of footprints. The problem is I don't even see my own because the ground is so compact around there. I double check and I'm not in any sort of slope at all. The ground is completely flat. I really have no idea how this happened, and I know I was startled awake by that sensation of swiftly sliding down the hill towards my feet. My pad with me in it was being dragged out. I quickly had breakfast, packed up and headed out. I was supposed to spend one more night on the trail, but the longer I hiked the more I thought that what would happen the next night. These thoughts running in my head the entire day as I walked. Could it have been another person? I didn't hear anything. Why would anyone do that to anyone else? How could I have slid down so far? Maybe it was an animal. It couldn't have been. There were no punctures in my mattress and there were no footprints anywhere. Did I just slide throughout the night with restless sleep? It doesn't make any sense. I normally sleep on a slight incline, and I've never slid outside of the tarp before. Was this paranormal? I'm not far from Albert Pike. Could this been some sort of ghost trying to save me from a flash flood horror that it was reliving over and over? All day long, the same things were running through my head. I ended up hiking to my car and sleeping in there that night. The Athens Big Fort Trail was very tough going up over 6 mountains. It was almost dark after I descended the last one. I hiked the last 3 or so miles by headlamp in the dark. I wasn't keen on sleeping on the trail another night after that. Truth is, I've been on that trail a ton, and will for sure go back. I've been all over Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Around 750 miles and countless nights spent in the woods all over the place. I almost exclusively hike solo. I never carry a gun or bear spray. I don't carry a SAT phone or GPS transponder. That is the only weird and unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me regarding camping, backpacking, and the outdoors.
I don't know if anyone on here has ever had interactions with this woman, but I can't seem to get her out of my mind. This isn't any ordinary woman, and no, I'm not referring to her like that because I am romantically interested in her. She was a caregiver for me 2 decades ago, when I was but a child, but since I last saw her, everything she had has fallen into decay. She lived out on a ranch and lived in a ranch home and would care for me and a few other children while our parents were away. She was an important person in my life, and sometimes around Halloween, I would see her come by my house with her grandchildren as they would ask for candy. But I have not seen her in many years, and was curious recently as to her whereabouts. I decided to make the short 15-minute drive down to her estate from my house, and went to go and see what had become of the old house. I saw a new color of paint had been painted over the exterior of the house, and that there was a metal trailer in the driveway. It was unusual to me driving up to a large yellow ranch house rather than the pink one I used to arrive at when I was with my mother. I only ever went there during the summer, but the summers I was there were the best. I looked out at the old ranch and remembered having so much fun out there amongst the dirt and rock, running around and being free. I remember her husband working day in and day out, renovating old muscle cars and selling them. I remember sometimes going to help him. This was a fair portion of my childhood, and I wanted to pay her a visit the year before I head off to medical school. I pulled up in the long driveway and got out to go look and knock on the front door. I noticed as I was walking to the front door that there had been a small garden made of pots full of vegetables that had never been there. I thought the sight of this peculiar, but didn't think much else of it. I arrived at the front door and knocked. I saw a young woman arrive at the front, but it was no one related to my caregiver, nor anyone I recognized. She asked for my information, and I told her my name and asked where my old caregiver was by name. All she did was point to a trailer in a rather angry and dismissive tone and told me, "The old bag is in there. We've been leasing this house for 3 years, and she hasn't left. She's in that trailer over there. Please leave me and my family alone." The young woman slammed the door in my face and left me rather bewildered as to her reaction when I asked about my old caregiver. Ultimately unfazed, I decided to go and take a knock on the old trailer instead, hoping to be met with a more positive response. I was actually met by my caregiver, but the state I found her in was all but pleasant. She was in what appeared to be weeks-old clothing, holding what appeared to be a starving infant in her left arm, and in her right arm, well, her right arm was disturbingly hanging out of its socket by some sinew and staples that she had attached to the left bicep to keep it attached to her. When she swung around to meet me at the door, the yellowed but exposed human bone inside of her left arm was showing. It was the color of pasty yellow and looked to be infected. I was in disbelief as to the state I found her in. "Oh, it is so good to see you! It has been such a long time since I've had any visitors." Her entire body seemed to be rotting right in front of me. "Yes, hi. I'm looking for Mrs. Nicole Blankenship." "You found her. Yes, it's me." This was disturbing to me. The same woman who was my caregiver for nearly 2 decades ago was now standing before me, nothing more than a collection of bones. Worse yet, she was holding a starving infant. I tried to think of any way I could help her, but I had to know what had brought her to this point. "What happened, Mrs. Blankenship? Why are you here instead of in your own home?" I asked this, all the while trying to not eye her exposed humerus that was slightly protruding out of the infected hole. "Oh, I started leasing my home after my husband passed. He was such a good man. Since then, I've been living out of my days in here." I could hardly call what she was experiencing and suffering through day in and day out living. "How long have you been like this?" Her reply filled me with dread and concern. "Oh, I haven't had food in a few days, and Junior over here hasn't had much to eat today." As she said this, the body began to cry and wail, but its cries were muffled and painful to hear. "Hey, I already told you the last cookie is for me!" Right as she said this, I heard the woman from inside the house open the door and shout at me, "Hey, I told you to leave! Get off my property now!" My caregiver nearly lunged for me when she brought her face to mine. "It isn't safe here. You need to leave now. Leave while you still can." My caregiver didn't have to tell me twice. As I hopped in my car and sped away at the same time, the young woman who told me to leave brought out a shotgun and started shooting buckshot at my car. I made it out alive and well, but never understood why my caregiver was trapped there. So I ended up filing a police report and asking that a warrant be made to go and search at the old trailer so that at least my caregiver would be freed from the tyrant who shot at me. But much to my dismay, the police reported back that there was no one there but a pile of old bones. They ended up arresting the young woman for resisting arrest and trying to shoot a few officers. As it turned out, they had locked away my caregiver inside of that trailer when she first tried to lease the house and leave it behind for good. They trapped her inside and stole her identity as they lived in the house off of her dollar and ran an at-home methamphetamine making operation. All of this information was a lot to take in, but the first detail of the report had me most concerned. She was never alive when I got there, and had died 3 years prior due to starvation and being locked inside of the trailer. No other people from the ranch house nearby heard her screams and cries for help, as she died inside of that trailer, never having been found by anyone. That was until I came searching that fateful day. Her family got into contact with me after the reports came out that the young woman who shot at me that fateful day was being put on trial along with her husband for first-degree murder and several other charges. They thanked me for having found their mother and grandmother inside of that trailer and bringing a close to the 3-year mystery they've all had as to her whereabouts. No one thought to check the old metal trailer that she was in. The only thing I couldn't get off my mind was the image of her holding a starving infant in one arm and her other arm being stapled to her side and her bones exposed. I thought perhaps my mind made the image of her up, but I can't help shaking the feeling that maybe that was her, but it was her spirit instead of her, a phantom of what and who she really was when she died. I suppose I did the right thing though in the end. I'm glad that my caregiver no longer has to worry about anyone else and can finally rest in peace. But this experience has taught me 3 things. 1, always carry a phone around. 2, always be suspicious of people. And 3, which is most important, never be afraid to try and reach out for help, especially in a dying time of need.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear April. Happy birthday to